soon as you give me like a little holiday break, like my brain just starts slow, especially because we're the last class after 5. Brain just starts, it's like backing off and I have to push it. I mean, normally I'm pretty, just keep going, but give me a little break.
You're probably better at Google Docs than me because I don't even know how to do the outline thing that you did on the side with like the tabs.
Oh, really?
Would not have been able to do that.
Oh, so you just press enter and then
I'll
pull
be back, don't go away.
a dash, like the minus sign, and then you press tab, and it just starts tabbing.
Oh, it does that like on its own?
Yeah, and
Oh.
then once you press enter, it'll like keep going the same level, and if you press tab, it'll start shifting it down. You know, like how I did like the scale thing.
Okay.
It goes down. Yeah.
They must like, because I feel like I haven't used Google Docs in years, so it's probably been updated since last
Well, I
time.
was so scared that you guys weren't gonna be able to like go in and edit it, so I checked it like a million times
Yeah.
before I sent it over. And I'm like,
It's been like, yeah, I just added a random letter and deleted it.
okay, wonderful, good. Yeah, and then if we're in there at the same time, like Google Docs will assign us each a color.
Yeah, I
So
see.
you can-
I'm blue and she was on there for a minute and she was pink. So.
Yeah, yeah. And then it shows us like who's all on the document and where they're editing.
Mm-hmm.
So
And I know, like, I'm pretty sure you can, like, if you select words, I think you can add comments. Yeah, I see a little comment bubble.
yeah. So if you want to like emphasize something on just like that specific word or topic,
Yeah.
yeah, we can
Like, not like changing the document, but just trying to, like, make a point.
Mhm.
Okay. And then, Carolyn, I got your document too, just so you know.
But
Yes.
I was a little worried about that.
No, correct me if I'm wrong, but that stuff's not, like, Carolyn, your thing it's not due until Wednesday, correct? Or is that due today?
Right, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't
cool.
think I did them
Oh,
until
sure.
Wednesday.
Okay, yeah, because
He said that ours is gonna be due Friday.
Ours is a little bit
Like
later.
the ministries are due Friday because we're gonna go over.
Next Friday?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was
See, next
today.
Friday.
Yeah, I had a panic attack. That's why I made this late.
I was up till midnight doing it last night. Like, I stayed up till then anyways, but like, I normally sleep by midnight, but like, I was still typing at midnight, and I'm like, I gotta get this done, gotta email it to him, and then I'm like, this is really crap, but it's like a preliminary thing that we can go over, and I'm like,
Yeah,
next Friday?
Yeah,
Okay,
because-
well, it's in there,
yeah,
so
that's
everyone
good.
wants to see it.
Because last class he was saying, like, 'cause on Monday he said Wednesday we're gonna go over President Habakkuk. And I'm like, okay, so I gotta get mine done by Friday. Well, then last class we went over the EU, right, the European Union
Yeah.
person, and he goes, and she got it done, like, she didn't have her until Wednesday. I'm like, it's Wednesday.
Yeah.
He needs after a break.
That's when I realized we have more time, because he said, like, she got it done early, and I'm like, well, today's Wednesday.
Yeah.
That means next week,
Yeah,
okay.
and because we didn't go over President Habakkuk, I'm like, I'm gonna just assume it's next Friday and go with it.
See, I was still like,
I'm sorry.
going on today, no, you just gave me such a relief,
Oh,
like, because
good.
it was crap, so at least people have time to go in and be like,
Yeah.
you know, fix this.
Yeah, literally all I sent the people in my ministry was this like very brief layout of dot points that I'm like, this might be okay. We'll
Like, I
see.
wrote 3 paragraphs kind of targeting those questions she asked.
Yeah, so the way that I set it up is that we'll have like the introduction and then we're gonna talk about like problem 1 of immigration and migration, problem 2 of labor rights of immigrants, and then we're gonna go into the 3 questions.
Okay.
And then, the questions, like, we'll answer those, and then we'll go into, like, the resolutions of the questions on, like, how we're gonna resolve this, and then the 4th one is going to be about getting rid of the Balfour Declaration, and then our conclusion. Because I think he said that he wants all of them to mention, like, that this is all the stuff that we're demanding, but we have to get rid of the Balfour Declaration in order to even, like, process this, because we need to be recognized as our country.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes me feel so much
It's a
better.
lot.
And like, my problem is, I know I took global like once, like 4 years ago, but I also remember it was my teacher's last year. So he was just done, and every Wednesday he brought in like cupcakes and juice, and that's all we did, was just like talk and eat cupcakes, and he didn't teach once a week. So I don't have a lot of global like background.
I was explaining Palestine situation to my friend last night over coffee, and I'm like, do you even know where Palestine is? She goes, no. And this might sound really stupid on my part. I didn't know that like England, Great Britain, and Scotland are like in the same area. Didn't know that. So we pulled up a world map, and I'm showing her, I'm like, look at, and I had to zoom in, like, this is Israel, and Palestine's like on the edge of it. And like we were looking at the map, and
If you gave
felt
me,
really stupid.
if you gave me a blank world map, I could probably label US and Canada, and that's probably as much as I can
Yeah.
The only
guarantee.
reason I know so much is because my global teacher in like 9th and 10th grade, he forced us to memorize like certain spots, Palestine not being one of them. We rarely, like, I think the only time we talked about it was the Crusades. But then it was only referenced as the Holy Land,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah, no, I could live with like Russia and like the big ones probably, but not like all these small ones. Yeah, I didn't know that like Scotland was part of it.
You know, live with Russia?
No, we were talking about labeling the world map.
And our lack of global knowledge.
Yes, the
Oh.
lack of global knowledge.
Well, why do we have a lack of global knowledge?
Well, I said that my global teacher, I took global history 1 year, and it was my teacher's last year, he was done. He was not trying to teach that year. So his last one before retirement.
Boy, my last year, I'll be going so hard, people will be screaming. Because what the hell, I know. Then I was in Army ROTC, and of course we played with maps, and this is all before all this technology, so you either looked at a map or you didn't have it, so, and I still don't have a GPS, and I said to people, what do you need that for? Look at a map. I don't understand. I can't. I said, I just find my way around. So I always joke with people, I go to languages where stuff is. And I go, I don't know. What did I do with President Abbas's open statement? With me, when you get a class right before break, especially when you're the last class right before break, which is what you guys do. Okay, so, for the ministries, for the opening statements, if we could try to have them by a week from today, if that's possible. So, I think we have a minister for every department, so what I want to do this morning is share President Abbas's, opening statement, which,
It's still not done.
well, I know, it's a draft, and I understand that. But we want to look at it, one, because the ministries have to reflect what you said. And just like I shared the European Union opening statement with you, I shared the Palestinian opening statement with them. One, to show, again, another opening statement, and also that class, because it's called World Politics, I can't focus on Palestine as much as I always typically enjoy doing. So it gave me I used yours as a teaching tool because I know it's a rough draft, but I think it's pretty good. So, and I appreciate the fact that you had questions in there, so we can polish this up. But I not only enjoyed reading through it with my class, I enjoyed being able to teach them something about Palestine. So, hats off. Happy Valentine's Day, you did a nice job. Woke me up, and which he usually does when he thinks it's time for me to get going and go to work. This morning he's on my chest washing my face, and he loves doing that. I don't really like it, but he likes it. So it's Valentine's Day, I let him go for a while. He's just trying to be friendly, he's a sweetie. Yeah. So, anybody have any questions, comments, concerns before I proceed? I'll take a drink of my lukewarm pot coffee. We think we're okay? Okay, so we're gonna look at President Abbas's opening statement. As we go through it, President Abbas, if you have any comments, or if anybody in class has questions or suggestions for improving it, or whatever, just let me know. With the EU, the President of the EU is on her second draft, and we went over that this morning, it just got even better. And in her opening statement, she in fact does talk about Palestine, because the EU is the #1 funder of Palestine, and especially with the United States dropping out of the picture. So she incorporated a paragraph about Palestine, and a paragraph about the DPRK. So, well, let's just take a look. I see you had a question right away. Can this be written from a U.S. citizen's knowledge base, like the Freedom is the Future article, and I think I scanned that and sent it to you.
Yes, I got that. That was really helpful in writing that.
If you look at Zionism did not start in the Middle East. It started in Europe and America. And so the Zionists, who eventually drafted the language that became part of the Balfour Declaration, basically was written by Europeans and Americans, Jewish people who weren't living in the Middle East, because while they certainly were welcome to live in the Middle East, and lots of Jewish people did, they didn't have the nation state that they wanted. So the Balfour Declaration and eventually the creation of Israel was written from U.S. and Europeans' knowledge. So it's part of the diaspora. We have the same problem as Palestine. So that's a great question. My answer is yes, absolutely. Especially since you said that you found that helpful. And based on my understanding, from what I've been doing with research and studying, it's certainly consistent with everything the Palestinians themselves over there have said. So, yeah, please do that. And in fact, you can even reference the diaspora. That's perfectly okay, because you get into the right of return and all that stuff. So it says, on behalf of the people of Palestine, which is great. That's the way it should be. And I recommended to the European Union that when they start talking about you guys, instead of just saying, it's okay to say Palestinians, but I think the way you started out, it lends legitimacy to say we're speaking on behalf of the people of Palestine. So I think that was a good way to start. The PA welcomes all those gathered to partake in this joint endeavor. It is an honor to be part of this discussion, and we look forward to coming to solutions that address the issues facing us today. And then you had a question, anything else? Were you thinking maybe that something else should be in there, or?
I was wondering if we had to acknowledge any help or there was another part of addressing all the delegates that I just don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. When you said that, it made me think, well, maybe what we should do in that opening paragraph is thank the European Union for their continued support. And maybe because what was that, 138 from 193? Olivia, was that the number? Just pull a number.
138.
Out of 193?
Yes.
Why in God's name would I remember that?
It's important.
I can't remember people's names. Well, it is important. Maybe you could thank the European Union for their continued support. Anybody know roughly, anybody got a calculator can figure out 138 divided by 193, what percentage of countries that would be?
Yeah, I can do that real quick.
Because the percentage might be more impressive than the actual number of countries.
71.5%.
So almost 3/4.
Yeah.
What I usually do when I do this stuff, in the real world as well as in the academic world, I always say, well, almost 3/4.
Yeah.
I think what you can do, and I love, it's a good thing you said anything else. Let's thank the European Union for their continued support. And
Carolyn, do you want me to type that into the document?
you have access to the document
Okay. Yeah, I have it up on my computer.
as well in your Swell Google Docs. Tool save. And then I assume the Segway doesn't mean you want to go riding down the street on one of those things with wheels, right? Aren't those called Segways?
They are.
They are.
Why are they called Segways? Little known and less cared about facts, right? I don't know if we need a Segway. I like the fact that you thank everybody and then boom. And it fits in very nicely with thanking the European Union for their continued support, and then there will be 3/4 of the nations who, blah, blah, blah. And then you go, we demand. I think that's your segue.
Okay.
So I think it's a good question, unless somebody else has another thought. We demand the people of Palestine receive validation of their existence and rights in the form of an independent nation state. Palestine has lived under the tyranny, I love that word, of Israel's government for 70 long years. And we demand reparations and justice for the travesties committed against the people of Palestine by Israel and all those who support them. Maybe you could say for over 70 years. It goes back to my always exaggerate a little bit. Or you could say for more than 70 years, which is 3 generations, because that might then grab the attention of the North, who has been living in that situation for roughly the same time. So, and a little, I like the demand is grossly inaccurate and denied the inhabitants their membership as people in the eyes of foreign governments. Why don't you say in the eyes of the world community instead of foreign governments? And then you misspelled Balfour because you got Balfour. But that's okay. Just drop the E. Now you put the Balfour Declaration supported. What was the question mark for? The Balfour Declaration supported?
I think I was wondering if
Well,
maybe
yeah, go ahead.
it was mentioned that it's like we reword it and say that rather than supported, it's justified.
What if you were to say, instead of supported, say condoned? It condoned this Zionist statement.
well, she also said, what was you said justified, condoned, supported.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna use that later.
Oh, okay.
Say what? What did you say?
I think I might have used the word justified later.
Yeah, you know what? While I was listening to you guys, I was trying to think: is there a way that we can ramp this up and make it stronger? And say, for example, the Balfour Declaration imposed against our will this Zionist ramp it up because it was imposed on us against our will, and that whole Zionist sentiment is all made up. It's fiction. So maybe you could say the Zionist fiction. I think we got to hit them hard.
What if we were to somehow describe the Balfour Declaration like outdated or inaccurate?
That's even
Or
better.
we could use their own lingo and say the unclear Balfour Declaration, because it says clearly in the Balfour Declaration.
Yeah, or ambiguous, or the deliberately ambiguous, outdated Balfour Declaration imposed the Zionist fantasy on us against our will, and how Palestinians often have a very strong literary sense. They like to play with language. I think that could really ramp that sentence up and hit them right in the eyes.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm glad you had that question mark there.
Mhm.
Because then we can be we get to be very creative, and it would be very consistent. Even though President Abbas was going to tone down his reference to the peace plans, and again, the only thing we have to bargain with is our language, and it would truly reflect our sense of culture that, you know, this is the way we often relate and talk to each other, even on a daily basis. It's fascinating. I mean, you know, if you're an American, like I assume we probably all are, born in this country, you tend not to, I mean, we have a culture, but it's sort of bland at times. Unless you have really strong ethnic ties, like, you know, I'm Polish American. Spent most of my time with my grandparents who came from Poland, and I grew up, I always tell people I grew up in Poland first, and of course I spoke English and everything else. And then I became an American because my grandparents, as Central Europeans, were sort of this way too. And they weren't well educated. They were just ordinary, good, hardworking, lovely people. But they kind of had this almost, and I was joking about it in world politics. I said, well, today's Valentine's Day. And I tend to be romantic, like, you know, Oliver and Ziva get treats because it's Valentine's Day. So it's part of my culture, but I think we've lost some of that in America, unless you have some sort of strong ethnic background. because I hear this with Italians, I hear this with all kinds of people, Jewish people, because my brother married an Italian family, then my cousin married into a Jewish family, and I was fascinated as a young man, still in college, but the one thing all three cultures had in common was this sort of sensual romance and literary sense, even if you weren't well educated. That's the way you talk, that's the way you related. Very emotional. Everybody's kissing and hugging and screaming and yelling. And eventually all three families got along because, some of us were Catholic, some of us were Jewish. But we all screamed, yelled, laughed, cried, and everybody had good food. So then nobody cared. At first it was a little rough, but eventually we figured out we were all the same. So, and I think the Palestinian people are very much like that, emotional and welcoming, and also because most Palestinians are Muslims, there's a very strong tradition of this in Muslim culture, and you can see that, even in the one story that we talked about in the book, Shit River. There's this, including their favorite poet, about all of this is what eventually makes life worth living. So we want to be overly sentimental. So we first demand stuff, and then we denounce the very thing that they did to us. And through its distribution, allowed the seizure of land and destruction of property has created the Nakba Palestinians live in today. And then you have this, that's a great question, is Nakba used to refer to the present? And I talked about this a little in my other class, I said, absolutely. For us, the Nakba may have happened historically in the 1940s, but again, making that parallel to North Korea with this transgenerational trauma, if you look at the way we, meaning we're Palestinians, live, we are living the Nakba. So I think it's great that you talked about has created the Nakba. We are still living that catastrophe. It is still part of it is the dominant thing in our life at all times. So yeah, I'm glad you asked that, absolutely. For us, it's not the past, it's the present. So, and that one I forgot, I'm always in reading, but sometimes Palestinians talk about three Nakbas, but it's like the Nakba is still there, and the generational trauma is still there. And when you look at us living behind walls with checkpoints and people with machine guns, if anything, it's worse now than, and that's, what was that document called again? Freedom in the Future. So we'd like to have freedom in the future, but we're very much afraid that this Nakba thing is just not going to go away. It's a reference to the beginning of our sense of a Palestinian nationhood. And in a bad way. In my 9 o'clock class, I kept saying, well, if you're an American, we often reference the spirit of 76, which was for us a good thing because we broke from England, and when you guys are too young, but when 9/11 happened, and that was a pretty scary day, I told everybody, well, buck up, remember the spirit of 76, we're Americans, we can survive this, we can fight back. It's the same thing, it's still a very living thing. So, yeah, absolutely. Great question.
I have another question.
Sure.
Would I have to define what Nakba is, or would everyone participating in the simulation understand?
No, let them ask us. My world politics class with the EU and the DPRK, they will know what it is. I would assume some of the other delegations might, or will look it up if they've done anything in the Middle East, but I kind of like leaving it undefined because then it gives them an opportunity to say to us, well, what is this Nakba of which you speak? And then that gives us the opportunity to go on another tirade and explain it. So yeah, I kind of like leaving it unexplained. And even, like the Balfour Declaration, they might have to say to us, well, tell us more. And that's fine. Now, if they're, in the community college one that we do, what's unique about ours is, unlike the high school or the university one, ours is cross-disciplinary. So we have had English classes, political science classes, anthropology, geography, and we designed it that way deliberately because we wanted people in different classes to talk about these issues. So some of them may not know. I mean, today, of course, with the internet, you can look stuff up, but I think it also creates the opportunity to ask questions. So yeah, leave that and Balfour undefined. I think with our revamped language, if I were one of them, I'd be scurrying to the computer to look up Balfour. It's like, wow, these people are all worked up about this. And then it is of the utmost importance that the Balfour Declaration is overturned, for its ambiguous policies to no longer slow the progress of establishing peace in Palestine and to stop the injustice against our people as allowed to propagate. And then you're asking a question about wording on that sentence?
Yeah, are to no longer slow, but they are slowing is what I'm trying to say. I'm wondering how I can say that better. If I should split it up a bit more, if I should elaborate longer in another sentence.
No, I don't think you need to. Again, if they want to look up Balfour, they can. Unless somebody else has a suggestion for the wording.
What if we, sorry, not to just interrupt. What if you were to write, it is of the utmost importance that the Balfour Declaration is overturned, period, due to its ambiguous policies to no longer slow the progress of establishing peace in Palestine and to stop the injustice against our people. It has allowed to.
So you have to rework that if you had it as a separate sentence.
Yeah, but I think that to say that it has to be overturned, that needs to be a sentence in itself, and then explaining that why, because it's due to its ambiguous policies.
Yeah, that might be a good idea.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah, I keep suggesting that as a solution, the problem is Balfour, and a lot of people want to point to Truman and the UN partition plan in the 1940s, and I think that's important. But I keep saying, no, you got to go back to Balfour, because unless we undo Balfour, with all that stuff we found in it that was wrong, we're just not going to solve this. And then in my world politics class, I suggest to them that a lot of scholars, and I would include myself in this list if I can call myself a scholar, that people will suggest the world today looks like the world did, although with obvious changes, especially in technology, like it did in 1914. And Balfour's 1917. So the world, we created a mess that we're still dealing with, and we're still just continuing the mess, including Trump's so-called peace plan. It's Balfour only on speed. It's Balfour plus. It's Balfour worse. But without Balfour, which is Zionism taken to the extreme, and a lot of you talked about the two theories of Zionism. It's the one that is narrow and specific, unlike the real Zionism, which was about justice for all. So I think Balfour is just, it's of interest historically, but I think it's of interest today, especially if you're Palestinian. So I like the idea of separating the two sentences. And this morning I was getting all worked up. Then I get worked up here.
And also maybe instead of saying it is of the utmost importance that the Balfour Declaration is overturned, maybe we can say it must be overturned to further emphasize our demand that it be taken out of history.
Well, or you can even say something must be repudiated, something stronger.
Yeah.
That's the root of all evil. I mean, ultimately Zionism is, but Balfour is the first time the Zionists got a government to do its bidding. British Balfour. And part of that was based on ignorance. And when we keep talking about how we're invisible, Balfour treated us as invisible, infungible. But the British just fell for it because they thought, they were superior to everybody. That's the other problem with that damn thing. But yeah. Anything else on this paragraph before I move ahead, or are we reasonably copacetic? This gave me a great opportunity after they have to do the EU revision, which was great. And then this gave me an opportunity to have more opportunity to help them understand the Palestinian situation. Once Palestine is acknowledged as a nation state, our people will be able to recover from the, what is a good word of Israel, I'll come back to that, and be able to work towards prosperity and contribute to the global stage, economics, WTO, human rights, oppression, restriction of movement, workers and immigrants, environment, reduce emissions, water resources for the people of Palestine. All those things at the end might be too much.
I left those there because it's all one big question. I want to know how each of the ministries stand and if I should address their plans in the opening statement or if I should leave it really open-ended.
And which plans? Oh, you mean?
Just give a general stance.
Yeah. I like keeping, once Palestine is acknowledged as a nation state, our people will be able to recover from the oppression of Israel and be able to work towards prosperity and contribute to the global stage. And I would stop at that unless somebody else has
I didn't
another.
want to use the prophecy.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's interesting is we haven't talked a lot about Trump's so-called peace plan, but he has said to the Palestinian people, I will talk to you about how we're going to help you have prosperity, but you have to give up your claim to have an independent nation state. Now, I mean, you guys have only been doing this for 5 weeks. I think you probably know that's a non-starter. What a ridiculous thing to say. If you give up your claim, then we'll help you. And the very heart of Palestine is garbage. They're telling the Palestinian people, give up the number one thing you want, and then we'll talk about helping you. Well, come on. So when you say it there, if they're paying attention to the outside world, that's like right now a very mild repudiation of Trump's peace plan, because I'm just not going to do it. And then I made the parallel this morning with Israel. You know, when President Truman recognized the right of Israel to exist in the late 1940s, he did not impose any conditions on them. He didn't say, well, you do A, B, and C, and then we'll recognize. Then we'll do A, B, and C for you. So it's a conditional thing in which Trump did not consult any Palestinians, whereas Truman's statement was non-conditional and he did consult Zionists. I tend to be an admirer of Truman on a lot of grounds, but I think with this stuff, he really screwed it up. And Trump is continuing in that same vein, even though these guys are polar opposites in so many ways. But the commonality is screwing up the Middle East situation, which the British first screwed up the Balfour Declaration. And Truman has admitted, basically, in a sense, that Palestinians to him were invisible. Didn't even get to the point of thinking it was fungible because he didn't think they existed, basically. So, yeah, I think if you end with that statement, that's enough, and then we can leave the laundry list out.
Okay.
That's okay with you?
Yes.
I do have a question though. What if we were to somehow add in that saying, or even the suggestion, or like conditions that have been stated by the peace plan, but not actually like come out right and say it, kind of be like a little vague about it, saying that that is completely against us, and like, how could somebody ask you to be against yourself?
Well, I think when the president gets in the next section that we want to deal with, that's where he's getting into
Okay.
it. I'm calling you he because you're playing the role of a male. Yeah, I think I like that
Okay.
sentence just by itself, and then we can, a lot of what you're talking about in the next section is more about exactly the opposite of the so-called Trump peace plan, which, if you've been watching the Democratic primary after New Hampshire for president, I was looking at the comments from all the Democratic candidates about Trump's plan, and I'm not a real big Bernie Sanders fan, but if he gets a nomination, I'll help him. But Bernie Sanders had the best statement about Trump's so-called plan, because in it, he acknowledged the right of the Palestinian people. I mean, I don't know how much Bernie knows, and I think Bernie is a Jewish American, but I don't know how much Bernie knows about the situation, but his reaction to Trump's plan said, this is outrageous. You're telling the people of Palestine that you'll help them, but only if they give up their right to what they've been asking for forever. And everybody else was sympathetic to the Palestinians, which was good, but I thought the best was Bernie. He just really nailed it and said, this is ridiculous. You're basically dismissing their major important claim. How can you do that? But if we leave that alone, and then we could go into now, in this section, this is based on that article that I did scan and send off to you.
I essentially just reworded everything.
Right.
I tried to change it up so it would fit better if you wanted to maybe insert it in paragraphs or just push them all into one instead of having them as separate.
No, I think it's okay to have them separate. What we have to do is find a way to connect the sentence here to this and take out I mean, we could use that.
No, I just wanted to label it so that.
Well, because you let me know where you got it from.
Yeah.
So we could have this reworked sentence and then take that out and then go right into this, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Because then as I was reading through this, I was ready to go to the front and start shooting, but and I'm not a particularly violent person. You inspired me to go fight. So I think you have the right tone in this whole thing. I mean, I like to think of myself as a scholar and academic, but because I practice politics in the real world, usually at the local, I worked up, so I figured you hit the right tone. If you get me worked up, that's great. Questions here, and then we'll go back. But I think over here, you talk about mentioning the indigenous people in America. I think absolutely you should. What's happening to us is colonial settlerism or settler colonialism. Same thing Americans did to the Indians, the Israelis with the support of the United States of America is doing to the Palestinians. And so making that parallel to how America has treated Native peoples, I think, I would bring that up. And then what was this question in that next paragraph? It says human rights.
I was wondering if we should bring in any of the human rights issues that the ministry was going to address in that.
Who's
I
our,
thought it was related.
yeah, who's our human rights minister?
I am.
So do you want to answer her question?
Well, what I've made a layout of what my proposal is going to be. I wanted to mention about the migration and immigration is the illegal acts of the Israel. I also wonder if we want to somehow like play it kind of coy in the fact that we mention about methods being put into place to quickly identify people via their license plates or their passports, and then say like in the sense that that's been done in history and we should be learning from our mistakes. Like,
Are you talking about doing that in your opening statement?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because are you asking if we should include parts of our opening statement in your opening statement? Because I feel like maybe we should save like the specifics for the human rights opening statement.
Reference that other stuff.
Yeah, if we wanted to allude to it, I was thinking that's where we would put it.
Yeah. I think what you got there is fine. I don't think we need to go any further in it unless somebody wants us to.
No, because I think that we could go more in depth in our own ministries
Right.
with the facts, just as long as they're
Yeah, you're gonna
mentioned.
get more specific.
Yeah, just so that they're not completely out of the blue what we're talking about, like it's kind of hinted at in hers as the opening statement.
Right.
And then when we get into ours, we can get more in depth, so it's not, and we're hitting on topics that she's already kind of mentioned
Yeah, she opened
in
the door.
preparation. Yeah,
Right.
yes.
Okay, and then we have this other one, does this apply to Palestine or only Palestinian Americans? Maybe reword it so it addresses both. Where you go, we demanded an end to the unconstitutional legislation denying our right to boycott for human rights. I think what you need to do is say, we demand an end, I would say illegal legislation, because unconstitutional sounds very American. An end to, oh, what was that?
That's what had me thinking about it. It's an unconstitutional, and I was wondering if it was the Palestinian Americans talking about their experience.
Yeah, and of course we're Americans, so it's sometimes hard for us to talk like other people. Although I think this sounds very Palestinian. We demand an end to the illegal legislation denying, I would say denying the right of our friends and supporters to insist on boycott, disinvestment, and sanction for human rights, because it's the BDSM movement, boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions. So that would apply, that could apply to Palestinians, it could apply to Palestinian Americans, it could apply to people like myself who are not Palestinian but are American. A lot of Americans, and in fact, a lot of Jews participate in the BDSM movement. But a lot of state legislatures in the United States are trying to pass laws making that illegal despite the First Amendment. So I think we do want to demand an end to it in support of our friends and supporters throughout the world.
So that's kind of specific. Should I say that it's an example of that, or should I just say that to you?
No, I wouldn't say example, but just, yeah, no. I mean, I think that's the biggest problem with the BDSM movement. One is the state legislatures passing what I think are unconstitutional. So I think you hit it right there because of the First Amendment. But that's only one of the things they do. But I don't think we need to talk about an example. And one of the things I keep talking to you about how the Israeli government keeps track of American academics. The Israeli government is very much afraid. This is why I often talk to students about the power of ideas. And the Israeli government is very afraid of American college professors who are attempting to teach students that there's more to this than just Israel's right to exist. I don't have a problem with Israel's right to exist. I don't think you can change that. Israel will continue. Whether it becomes a two-state solution or one-state solution, you know, I'm not trying to get rid of Israel. That's a fact that we have to live with. But the Israeli government is very much afraid of academics. Now, I keep talking about how Illinois, they were worried about how they said to me again, we probably couldn't do what you're doing at JCC because for whatever reason, the Israeli government is not watching community colleges, which is really kind of stupid on their part, but I'm not going to call them and tell them, hey, why don't you watch it? Because about 50% of undergraduates are in community colleges. So if you're only watching the major universities, then you're missing half of the story. And there's lots of us like me. I work with colleagues across the country, like in this simulation with community colleges, community college students who do excellent work. You know, and Illinois, which has this program to help community college professors keep doing research. And but we will never be able to go back to Palestine. I'll get to Tel Aviv and they won't let me in. Unless, because I'm a community college professor, I can fly under the radar. But I know my colleagues at major universities sometimes quite overtly are threatened, or less overtly, you know, they don't get tenure, they don't get promoted, because they're pushing a cause that some people object to. And I admit that I'm pushing a cause, although I'm doing my best to try to understand all sides. I don't even say both sides. I always say all sides, because I think do the Israelis have legitimate claims? Absolutely. Do the Palestinians have legitimate claims? Absolutely. And I'm trying to figure out a way to bring all that together, but I may have answered your question. Like I said, I get all heated and then I get carried away.
There's one more highlight, I think we went past over.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
There's a question mark by the word homeland.
Oh, yeah, thank you. All Palestinian people, so that's supposed to say all Palestinian people should have or have the, because we don't have the right to return. But,
You have question marks? I think I meant to say, should have.
yeah, because you know what, if you look at Trump's peace plan, I hate calling it a plan or I hate calling it peace, but he also said, we will help you out if you give up your right to return. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. If you can establish that your grandmother is Jewish, you have the right to go into Israel and claim Israeli citizenship as long as you can document that proof. Boom, you got it. And then Trump says, well, to the Palestinian people, no, you got to give up your right to a nation state. You got to give up your right to return. What kind of, I mean, it's just ridiculous. But thank you for bringing that up, because I keep talking about how that skeleton key is the symbol of the right to return. Palestinians want an independent nation state just like Israel. Palestinians want the right of return just like Israel. Why can't we have the same thing they have? So I think all Palestinians should have the right to return to their homeland. I don't have I could document that my grandmother's Polish. I don't have the right to return to Poland as a citizen. I have the right to visit, and I've been there a couple of times, but I don't have the right to demand citizenship. But I don't really want to go back. I like visiting, but my grandparents came. All right. Well, enjoy your mini break. You can come here and sit here Monday if you want to, but I won't be here. So I'll probably be in my office. But thank you. Good job, President Abbas. Okay.